Today, I want to follow up a little bit of what we were talking about prior, and I want to also introduce the next chapter or the next book. We've come to the end of the first book, Samadhipada, and the second book is Sadhanapada. Now, if we look at the titles of those two books, we can see in the first book, Patanjali, as I've said many times in these previous weeks, he's introduced the topic of how do we attain that state of cosmic consciousness, that state of samadhi, that state of oneness. And right off the bat, saying this is what he's going to be talking about, how each of us can move from our present condition toward ultimately fulfilling the purpose for our lives, for our existence, which is to find our freedom in that consciousness, our freedom, our liberation. And in the second book, he's already in the first book, he's given this overview of the topic. Now in the second book, the Sadhanapada, he's going to go a little bit more deeply into what do we do about it. You might say the more of a practical specifics. And now he's touched on these topics already, but now he's going to go into it more deeply. But before we go in to this second book, the Sadhanapada, which begins with the discussion of what I've titled today's talk is, how do we face our karma? I would like to conclude a little bit about this first book, and I don't want to go over individual slokas. There's 10 of them at the conclusion, numbers 41 through 51, and I recommend you read those, but they're basically summing up the discussion or going back and having a rediscussion on the topic of samadhi. You might say concluding that chapter and once again coming back with to discuss samadhi, and specifically he discusses the two states of samadhi. Samadhi being divided into two, and he uses various terms for that. But Swami Kriyananda, in his book Demystifying Patanjali, uses the words and the descriptions that Paramhansa Yogananda used to describe those two states, Sabikalpa Samadhi and Nirvikalpa Samadhi, conditional and unconditional. Now, again, I'm not going to go back and rehash that, but there is one point, one of the slokas that was particularly of interest, that I believe is number 41, that because it relates to what's going to come next, this discussion of karma, and the discussion of how do we face our karma. And he makes the point that both Nirvikalpa Samadhi and Sabikalpa Samadhi are seated. They are still seated. Now, we read that and we go over it quite quickly and we think, okay, they're still seated. But what does he mean? And there's a certain significance to that both of those, Nirvikalpa and Sabikalpa Samadhi, these are both still seated. What does he mean? Well, what he's saying here is that the word seated means that they still contain, there's an element of karma involved, seated within that state of consciousness that we attain when we attain either one or the other of these two states. The first being the state of Sabikalpa Samadhi, and the second, Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Now, Sabikalpa Samadhi is that state of samadhi where one transcends momentarily or temporarily, transcends ego consciousness. Ego consciousness is still there, but you could say we've gone beyond it temporarily. And we've gone into this deep state of ecstasy, this deep state of oneness, this deep state of expansion of consciousness that is embodied by that word samadhi. But yet it's temporary, and eventually our karmic seeds that are still implanted within our consciousness draw us back so we can return again, and the yogi learns to be able to return again and again to that state, but it's not permanent, and it's the karmic seeds themselves that draw us back into this egoic existence, and we have to, in a sense, we have to work them out. We have either one, you could say, those seeds have to sprout, and oftentimes in that sprouting, they cause new consciousness, or new karma, or they have to be roasted, or you might say, in the fire of our spiritual practice. But one or the other, they do have to be addressed. And the second state of samadhi is this Nirvikalpa Samadhi, which ultimately we come to the point where we enter into that exalted state and are able not just to experience that samadhi state in a state of breathlessness, in a state of trance, outside of our ability to work day to day in this world, but we are able to hold on to that state of consciousness, come back into the day-to-day world, breath, but yet not be bound by karma. In other words, or maybe that's not quite the way, not create new karma. We go beyond the attachment, the strings that tie the soul to the body is what ego is, and we cut those strings. We're able to free ourselves from karmic attachment or the creation of new karma. But yet, as Patanjali says, even in this state, it is still seeded with karma. And by that, what he means is karma still has its role in the sense that we do not create because there's no attachment. We're acting purely with no ego desire. But yet, what about all that has gone back before us? All of that past karma is still there. And so those still are seeds that will draw the jivan, the soul, back into this existence until all of that is worked out. All that past karma has to be worked out before ultimately the state of moksha can be attained. And this can be a very, very long process, or it can be a short process, perhaps, for a very advanced yogi. And interestingly, Paramhansa Yogananda said when asked about this, he said, oftentimes, a person that has reached this state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, they retain that old karma because it gives them an excuse to come back. In other words, not because there's a desire to come back, and it's a desireless desire, you could say, that to come back to, because they have a reason, most likely, to help their disciples, perhaps, to be able to come back and fulfill their love for others and mankind. And so there's this little bit of the old karma. And it said, if in that state, the soul can actually work that karma out, not necessarily physically in the physical actions necessarily, but you could sort of say ethereally or mentally, causally, it can be worked out. And there's karma on different planes as well. We have causal karma, subtle astral karma, and also we have this physical karma. So it's extremely complex, as you might imagine. But yet, and one interesting point that Paramhansa Yogananda made in his autobiography of the yogis, and he said even an advanced yogi can even manifest more than one body to be able to work out that karma more quickly if so desired, or so wishes. Desire, probably not the right word. But so you can see, but the important point is, by attaining that state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, we become what is known as the Jivan Mukta. We're free while living, but we're not creating new karma. And the state of bliss can be retained, whether in waking consciousness, a deep trance state of consciousness, in all action. And this is the state that we want to attain. Now, the point in particular that has struck me over the years, is we see ourselves we look at ourselves, or maybe we look at other people, but let's say ourselves. We have to realize we don't really see ourselves very clearly when we're embodied in this ego. And we really have no idea. We can hope that we're close to our goal, but we don't really know because you could say we're so in such a subjective state. And the past clouds of our karma, our perceptions of this reality, they cloud our view. And so we certainly are not an objective observer of ourselves. And so we look at someone or we look at ourselves as how could, that person looking at another person or looking at ourselves, how could that person be close to freedom? Look at all the past mistakes that person has made. Look at all the bad actions that person has taken in their life. How could that person become a saint? And turning that on ourselves, we look at, we remember all the bad actions that we did in the past. And we have all these regrets and we think about them. We think, I'm never going to make it. It's very difficult. And we dwell on those past identifications and past regrets. And it's not a healthy thing to do because the past it's done. The past is done. It's the important thing to keep in mind. It's not what we've done in the past that is important. It's what we're done right now. It's what we have attained right now. Where are we right now? Because the past lives of all men, as Swami Kriyananda said, are dark with many shames. It's what we do now and in the future that matters. And so we mustn't identify it. And if we take this in terms of the topic today, we must remember too, the important thing is to attain that state of freedom so we're not creating new karma. And then, yes, we do have to deal with the past. So if you're looking at somebody else, it's, how that scoundrel, I remember that scoundrel, he did all these bad things. But doesn't he have to pay for that? How can he attain this state of freedom in Jivan Mukta when he's got all that past karma? Think of Valmiki. He was a robber, a highwayman, probably killed people, and yet he became a great saint. How could he become a great saint? He's got all that bad karma. Well, that was the past. It's what he did after that. Now, yes, he does have that karma from the past, and he does have to fulfill it. But that is what we should do, fulfill that when we reach the state of saintliness. In that state, then we go back and we work out that past karma, and maybe we manifest two bodies, perhaps even make it more quicker. So I mentioned this because, and I've said before in other discourses, that there are two things that bring the soul back again and again in the karma. It's our karma, bring it back, incarnating again and again. Desire and regrets, you see, and both of those, desire for future attachments and regrets mean attachments to the past. And our lives are clouded by this. Now, I mentioned this particularly in terms of concluding the Samadhipada, Book 1 of the Yoga Sutras, because it has a bearing on where we are going next with these Patanjali lessons. Because in this next book, Samadhi Sadhanapada, he's going to go deeply into this topic of karma, the obstacles that prevent us from working out that karma properly, or that binds us to that karma, and how to not create that karma. And he's touched on this a little bit in the first book, but now he's going to go into it a little bit more extensively. And so this next book, at the very beginning, I'd like to read, because this is where we'll be going. He says, Patanjali, Sadhanapada, the way to samadhi. And isn't this really what we've talked about samadhi now, the way to it? I'm going to go more deeply. Book 2, first sloka. Accepting pain as purification, study of the scriptures and introspection, openness to the divine will and guidance, and acceptance of them. These constitute the practice of yoga. So if somebody, you could say, somebody might ask you, hey, what is yoga all about? What's the practice of yoga? Now, usually when we answer that question, if you know nothing about yoga, you might say, well, it's hatha yoga, yoga posture, yoga asanas. If you know a little bit more about it, you might say, well, it's meditation. You learn to meditate and become centered. Or if you have a little bit of scriptural inclination, you might say yoga is chitta vritti nirod and go into the meaning of that, the neutralization of the waves of chitta. Or you could say this is it's accepting pain is purification of the of the body and the scripture, and so on. The acceptance of pain is purification. Who wants to hear that? And not too many people. But yet, this also is true. In other words, rather than saying accepting pain is purification, you might expand that a little bit, generalize that. Accepting that which comes, all that comes to us as a process of tapasya, a process of purification, a process, and purification, what does that mean? You cleanse the body. You take a shower, you take a bath. And what are you doing? You're cleansing the body, and the process of cleansing and removing impurities from the body outwardly, and also you could say inwardly, and also you say spiritually, that process is purifying, making it clean. Now, of course, cleanliness, of course, is one of the niyamas, of course, is more than simply removal of soil, garden soil on the skin. It's removing those things that are impure, and impure has more to do with mental attitudes than it does, and spiritual approaches than it does with physical reality. One can be totally above this world and be covered in ashes, and yet still be in the state of purification. But nevertheless, we're speaking here of learning to purify ourselves. And so to face one, if we were to take these elements of this first sloka, how to face one's karma in life, how do we face this world? Karma is going to come to us. And now in the slokas ahead, he's going to take, Patanjali he'll take these one by one and go more deeply into it. So we'll come back to this, but I'll say just a little bit of an overview here in this discourse. Accepting pain as purification. Now, this is not to be understood as intentionally causing ourselves pain. There's might say an old tradition of scourging oneself, causing oneself pain, doing things that are very uncomfortable, building, a very hot day. Now it's the hot season now in India, so you could think about go sit out in the sun and build fires around yourself and be able to endure it. Now that's a tapasya exercise. There is some purpose to that, but it's not necessarily to cause oneself pain. It's to be able to strengthen one's endurance and one's ability to tolerate the ups and downs of outward life. And I don't recommend these sorts of exercises, but they do have a positive purpose, but it's not just to cause ourselves suffering. Some people, because they feel guilty about things they've done in the past, again, holding on to those regrets, feel that, I can balance the scales of my karma by causing myself pain now. I did something bad in the future, so I'll cause suffering to myself. This is not really a positive way to face one's karma, to cause pain to oneself. But to be able to face one's karma, to accept pain in the right attitude, in other words, to neutralize one's reactions to whatever happens outside of ourselves, this is purifying. And also, it is a method by which leads us to purification. Because what is pain but a reactive tendency to the circumstances of this world? And to feel very pain, oh my God, this is pain, brings with it a mental thought of, I don't like this. If it wasn't something you disliked, it wouldn't be classified as pain. Maybe it'd be classified as pleasure. But you see, pleasure and pain are but the different ends of the spectrum. And to be able to accept that negative side of it as purifying, something that's going to burn that karmic seeds in the past. And so if you can accept it in that way, it actually has a positive way to be able to face the sufferings and the disharmonies and the difficulties. And I think this is basically not allowing ourselves to be reactive. And of course, we always, oftentimes in the discussion of this is using, Swami Kriyananda would always use the example of the dentist. Nobody likes to go to the dentist. And, and because inherent in dentistry is a certain amount of pain. Now, they give you Novocaine and things like that, so you deaden the pain. You don't feel the pain. Now, if we use that as a metaphor for life, we don't want to deaden ourselves so that we don't feel pain. People do that through addictions, alcohol, outward pleasures, you might say distracting oneself so that I don't feel the pain. The behaviors that allow me to forget the inherent pain and suffering of life. And honestly, this is much of what we do in life, because at the root of our existence, there is a certain suffering and pain. It's that pain and suffering of separation from our true reality of our being and home in God. Disunity, we live in a state of duality, and it's inherent in a dualistic existence. Underneath, we know it's not our true reality, and so that is a discomfort, which can, as we dwell upon it, develop into suffering and pain. And so to run away from it, we don't want to cause to scourge ourselves for this, but at the same time, we can't run away from it, nor is it positive to fear it, because it's something inherent in our existence. The best thing to do would be, of course, is to face it, and to face it with a positive solution. And so consequently, before we can face something, we have to accept it. Accept it as a reality. It's okay. I've got a toothache. I've got this pain. What do I do about it? Well, I go to the dentist to help me. You go perhaps to the guru to help you with your spiritual pain. You find a solution, you face it, and you find solutions. And you can even accept it to the point that you could say, okay, I accept it. And in that very acceptance, assuming also it leads you to a solution, and pure acceptance is actually one of the solutions. So Swami would often say, when he would go to the dentist, he wouldn't use pain relievers, Novocaine, and he would he would distract his mind from the pain. He would just see it as waves, you might say, a reality, but he wouldn't mentally associate it as unpleasant or something not to push away from himself. It was just what it was. And in the total acceptance of it, he found that he was able to transcend it. Now, he did say it was not always easy. And to a large degree, when it was also a tapasya practice, to steel himself here in a very confined example of a situation for life in general, to be able to accept. And from out of that, he would often advise those of us who were his students to say, learn to just accept whatever comes, let it come. but not in a passive way, and deal with it in a positive way. And one of the positive ways, a very good way that Patanjali is saying, accept it. Accept it as purification. It's burning up all of that past karma. And then when he would advise students, he would say, people would ask him, I remember a question about injustice. It's unfair. This happened, that happened. It's just not right. They don't remember why it's fair. Life is fair. The karmic law is ultimate fairness. But they would say, it's just so unfair. This happened to me or that happened. He'd just say, accept it. Don't try to justify it. Justice is not meted out in this physical world of duality in the mind. It actually is in the background. He says, but don't look for it outwardly, and because you don't understand it. He says, just first learn to accept it and deal with it in a positive manner to solve it. What's the solution? Not what is the problem. Everybody can see the problem. Pain and suffering is the problem. Ignorance is the problem. Well, what's the solution? So this is the first one that Patanjali mentions in this sloka. Like I say, we're going to come back to this. And the second one is to introspect. Now, while you're accepting that pain or that suffering or that karma that has come back to you, accept means learn the lesson of introspect, learn the lessons of life. Why? What happened here? Now, that you don't want to, say, well, this happened and it was totally unfair, they judge it. You don't necessarily always know what the obvious is. We have to introspect, go deep. Perhaps as our intuition begins to expand, as we meditate, we begin to see things on a more deep level and try to come to a lesson. And if we can learn that lesson and integrate it, that's again how to face our karma in a positive manner. And Patanjali then goes on and says, openness to God's will. In other words, again, this comes back to acceptance, to be open that God's will is at play here. I don't understand why, you haven't introspected and learned the lesson. I don't understand. Well, that doesn't mean you shouldn't accept it. And to be open to see that, well, God's will is at play in this life. Guru's will. A lesson is being taught me here, even though I don't understand it, I don't know, but I am open to accepting whatever comes of itself. Let it come. And it's coming from God's hands. Now, if we see it in that way, God's will, the divine will, well, then we see, we can accept it in a positive manner, and we can actually feel some attitudes of welcome to what comes. Yes, it's for my good. See it as the hand of benevolence, to see other people in benevolent terms, to see circumstances in benevolent terms. And when you look at life from a viewpoint of benevolence, you don't resist it. You don't run away from it. You see the hand of the divine behind everything. And so if you're open to that, now openness is part of it. The process of being open itself is going to be a large discussion. How do we open ourselves rather than be closed? And now this is an introduction, you could say, to these topics. We're going to come back to it. So I won't go into that more deeply. But you could say it's also an acceptance of one's karma, facing one's karma, not running for one's karma, and a willingness to deal with it. He said, these are the practices of yoga. Now, as Patanjali is wont to do, he often says, otherwise, and then he'll add things. So as we go along, other things will be added here as we go along. But essentially, he begins with these. And again, I want to emphasize this, not to say when karma comes to us, how to face our karma, we should not try to mitigate our karma. This is part of what the discussion is going to be as we go forward in terms of our karma, and how to mitigate that pain. And in a sense, this is what life is about. It's the wheel of karma as the ruling force in this created world. And the implication here, of course, is there's worlds beyond the created world. But in the created world, karma rules the day. Now, we have to be able to accommodate ourselves today to that, not passively, but actively. So yes, that implies mitigating our karma, mitigating that pain, mitigating that suffering. And that's what we're going to explore that. And the best way, if we were to sum up that, you could do a lot of things, but karma is never ending as long as we're in dualistic consciousness. So we have to understand. So you can do many things endlessly. The best way is to raise our consciousness so that when it comes, we are not moved by it. And essentially, that's what Patanjali has said already, attaining that state of Jivan Mukta. So that, yes, the karma is there. Yes, we have to deal with it, but our consciousness is uplifted to the point where we're unmoved by it. Suffering, you could say, is no longer there. We are in a state of centeredness and are immovable from that. But few of us, honestly, really, I mean, few of us are capable of doing this. And we can at least keep a good attitude and move toward that goal. And that's what yoga is really about, is learning to practice these things that's going to take us beyond karma, and to the degree that we're in a state of duality, allow us to positively respond to it. Be even-minded and cheerful in the midst of it. And then we find opening up from that are the solutions to help us go beyond it. So I want to finish, though, that first chapter, the results, before we go more deeply into this second book, in the coming weeks. It's sloka number 41, and I'd like to read this one as holding this clearly in mind as we go forward. And Patanjali says, just as a pure crystal or unflawed mirror reflects the true shape and color of objects that are placed before it, so in the yogi's mind, upon the neutralization of his vortices of emotions in the heart, the vrittis, attains complete inner balance. He then realizes knowing, knower, known as one. And then he concludes at the end there. The awareness, I am free, which comes with this highest samadhi, eliminates all other impressions. When even this thought, I am free, is eliminated, the soul attains seedless samadhi, moksha, or complete liberation. And so I'm going to leave it at that. And then in the weeks ahead, we're going to go into this topic of how do we face our karma. And Patanjali, very next, again, as he did in that first chapter, he's going to address the issue of obstacles that we have to overcome to be able to face those obstacles to help that all of us face. We're embodied, we have karma. How do we face it? And so we'll move into that discussion. I'm going to go to the chat box now. And how do we get to know what we'll overcome some karma? Oh, well, let's wait. I'm going to go. This is what the coming weeks we're going to be discussing that. Okay, I don't see any mesh there. So I'll go back to that first. So how do we get to know that we've overcome some karma vritti? How do you know if you've overcome karma? Well, there's a certain sense of freedom that comes. Remember, we look at our karma in a way that we see this karma, that karma, that karma, and we see them as very discrete. But these things are all interlaced with one another. If you have karma in this one area, the implication is that the embodiment, we're still in the spectrum of duality. So we're never completely free of one particular karma if we've got any karma, you see, because the potential, karma still exists in the form of potential. And but yes, that's, you might say, a philosophical way of addressing it. The answer is you have to be complete. When you're completely free, then you're free. Otherwise, you're really not free of any karma necessarily, because it's still potential. But that's not the simple, more direct answer. Practical answer is there is a sense of freedom comes. It's not the seed of those thought forms that are behind that karma, dislike, disharmony, anger. Those seed thoughts no longer affect you. And you feel free. You feel free of them, and you have a sense of freedom that it just doesn't exist. It's non-existent for you anymore. And it comes with that feeling of freedom that comes in the heart. The heart itself begins to rest, and you realize that there's no impulse there. But what about a karmic tendency that might have been lifetimes ago? You don't hold anything in this lifetime. We don't know. So you're not going to be able to totally say, I am free, unless you can look back on all the past lifetimes that brought much of the karma that you're dealing with in this lifetime. Some of it has been created in this lifetime, but a lot of it you brought with you through past incarnations. So until you have totally purified your consciousness to the point where you can look back, and this is, again, only really attained when you've attained this state of Jivan Mukta, this pure, or Samadhi at least. In that state, you can look back and see. And then you can see, like a flawless mirror, you can see a perfect reflection. And of course, what keeps us from seeing into our past lifetimes is attachment to this one. So as long as there's attachment, and let's say as long as there's desire and regret in any form, there's attachment. And until those are overcome, you're not going to see beyond what's right in front of you right now. And so it's a bit of a question that doesn't have you can't answer that question, in that you're not going to be free with, as long as you're in a dualistic state. And anyway, how do we reduce karma? Well, this is, again, what we'll be implying this that's an overarching question that we'll be addressing in the weeks to come. By mitigating, do we simply postpone it? Well, sometimes, yeah, we do, but that's not really solving it. As the question's asking here about mitigation, we want to get rid of it. We want to solve it, not just postpone it. And then we can have any life without any karma. Yes, we can. We can have life, and that is the state of a master. That's our potential. You see, that's the potential. You might say it's even the destiny of us, but yet, and so consequently, that obviously is a very exalted state. Karma brings us back here, and we have to ultimately find our liberation. Most souls, as Paramhansa Yogananda said, when they complete liberation and transcend all karma, past and present, that liberation, they merge back into the infinite, and they don't take rebirth again, except under the command of divine will. Okay, thank you very much. And so let's come back next week, and we'll delve further into this topic of how do we face our karma and overcome the obstacles to it. Joy to you.